the Charter is a call for action. And it's not just ever meant to be a feel-good factor. We have to learn how realistically, practically, we can implement the golden rule in the troubled circumstances of the 21st century, in business ethics, in education, in politics, in every walk of life. And it's a summons to every single person to ask what he or she can do in his or her particular sphere to make the world a more compassionate place. Well, what is compassion? The English word has become so bowdlerized that people often seem to think it simply means feeling sorry for people. But in fact, compassion does not mean pity. It comes from a Greek-Latin root which means kompathein, to endure with, to suffer with another, to put yourself consistently in somebody else's shoes. Never treat others as you would not like to be treated yourself. Look into your own heart, discover what gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever to inflict that pain on anybody else. Do not treat others as you would not like them to treat you. Every tradition has its own word, its own take on this, and I've tried to explain all this in my book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. Now, in a Muslim country, the reference of that title may not grab you. It's a deliberate reference to the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was quite deliberate in a way, because I think we are addicted to our prejudices. We are dependent upon them, as dependent as a narcotic. Well, you know what I'm trying to say, addict. Because we don't know what we'd do without them. We depend upon them for our sense of ourselves. And when we utter an unkind or scathing or contemptuous remark of another person or another people, we often feel a buzz, a sort of delighted glow of self-congratulation, not unlike perhaps the first cigarette of the day or the first drink of the day. But of course, this is also poisoning us. It poisons our whole humanity, and it poisons the social environment and relationship between human beings. And so I've devised this 12-step program to help us little by little incorporate compassionate practice into our lives, weaning us away from this dependence upon a dismissive, prejudiced outlook. Because we must learn not merely to tolerate the other, but to appreciate all human beings. Now, I haven't got time this morning to plod through all 12 steps. They begin with such obvious things as learning more about compassion in your own and other people's traditions. What is the Quran, from start to finish, but a summons to compassion, to practical action? A call to create a just and decent society where poor and vulnerable people are treated with absolute respect, and to share wealth fairly and equitably, and ensure that nobody, no orphan, no widow, no poor person suffers. It's an uphill struggle, and of course it's a constant jihad in the true sense. A constant struggle and effort and endeavor. I'm just going to concentrate on a couple of these steps, if I may, this morning. One is step 8, which is how do we speak to one another? Very often in our discourse today, it's not enough for us in the media, in academia, in the law courts, to seek the truth. We also want to humiliate and defeat our opponents. And this too helps to poison and polarize the atmosphere. Even within a single country, different groups can vilify one another. We've seen this in the United States recently in the hate, the aggressive political discourse, which helped perhaps to lead up to the tragedy in Arizona, where a congresswoman was shot and many other innocent bystanders were killed. And we often talk about dialogue these days, and there's a general idea that if only we could engage in dialogue, peace would break out. But what do we mean by dialogue? There's very little Socratic dialogue going on. When people came to Socrates to ask, to talk to him, they always thought they knew exactly what they were talking about. But after 15 minutes of Socrates' relentless questioning, they discovered that they didn't know the first thing about such basic issues as courage or justice or goodness. And at the end of a Socratic dialogue, nobody wins. Everybody realizes that they know nothing at all. And at that moment, Socrates said, they've become a philosopher. You do not become a wise human being until and unless you have subjected every single one of your inherited, received prejudices, ideas to rigorous scrutiny. An unexamined life, said Socrates on the last day of his life, is not worth living. But yet so often we speak about each other in a really sort of omniscient way, saying, oh, well, the trouble with him is, as though we could absolutely nail and encapsulate the whole of that person's complex psychic and personal life. Oh, well, she's always like this. We speak with omniscience not only about individuals, but about whole cultures. As I'm sure you're aware of the way that British and European and United States people often speak about Islam in a way that depends on a half-remembered op-ed article here or a television program there, and then it becomes a hard and fast opinion, and we identify very aggressively with our opinions. A lot of it is ego. So we must try, I think, and temper the way we speak to one another. I always remember a particular passage from Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, in which you remember, of course, that the king of Denmark is concerned that Hamlet is making a lot of trouble in the Danish court. So he asks two of his Hamlet's old friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to spy upon him. It doesn't take Hamlet long to find out what's going on. And so one night he approaches Guildenstern with a pipe, and he says, I pray you, play upon this pipe. And Guildenstern says, I cannot, my lord. It's as easy as lying, says Hamlet, caustically. All you have to do is blow down this tube and wiggle your fingers around, and out comes the music. My lord, I have not the skill, says Guildenstern. Why, look you now, says Hamlet, what a poor thing you would make of me. You would pull out all my stops. You would play me to the top of your bent. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. And how often we pluck out the heart of the mystery of the people around us, of attributing our ideas, foisting our notion of what they stand for or how they behave onto them in a way that is entirely false. How often we use other people, play upon them in order to further our own interests and our own ideas. Each one of us is a sacred mystery, an absolutely unknown territory. How well do you know the colleague you sit next to every day? How much do you know of his or her personal grief, disappointment, sorrow, hopes, fears, nightmares, neuroses, things that he or she doesn't necessarily share with anybody? And then so often when we think about other people's, how little we know about the complexity of each nation or each religion. Behind the leaders who appear in the press, there are hundreds and thousands of human beings, each with their own private history of pain. And we should always remember that. Lay aside our omniscience and speak to one another with the gentleness that Socrates required of true dialogue, where nobody must be pushed into a position that he or she does not want to be. Very often, dialogue simply means forcing the other side to accept our opinion. And we are often faced with the struggle of dealing with people in our own society who have very different ideas from us. But I think we need to keep the level of discourse and confrontation down. I've made a study of what's often called, unfortunately perhaps, religious fundamentalism in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and every single one of the movements that I've studied has been rooted in a profound fear and anxiety. And when these movements are attacked in any way, either with guns or in the media, they invariably become more extreme, because this ratifies their fear. And so let us remember how little we know about each other's hopes and fears, and try to ask yourself when you're about to sort of hold forth about the enemy, how much you really know. Are you really seeking to rectify the situation, or to punish, or to let off steam? Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi poet and mystic, said that every single one of us was a unique and unrepeatable incarnation, revelation of one of God's hidden names. Every single one of us enshrines a particular conception of deity, whatever our faith or whatever our lack of faith. And our duty is to look beneath the unpromising exterior and to see the divine, the sacred element in that human being. He also made this remark, which I found very early in my studies and took as a watchword for myself after years of a very parochial Catholic upbringing where we didn't even think Protestants were on the charts. I found this extraordinarily liberating. Here's what he says: "Do not praise your own faith so exclusively that you disbelieve all the rest. If you do this, you will miss much good. Nay, you will miss the whole truth of the matter. God, the omniscient and omnipresent, cannot be confined to any one creed. For he says in the Quran, 'Wheresoever ye turn, there is the face of Allah.' Everybody praises what he knows. His God is his own creature, and in praising it, he praises himself, which he would not do if he were just. But his dislike is based on ignorance." Well, in the 12 steps, I try to address that problem of ignorance about other people's. But I'm going to skip a few more steps and go to the end, the most challenging of all: love your enemy. How do we do that? Now, you have to remember that when Jesus made that remark, love your enemy, he wasn't thinking of emotive, the kind of love. We bowdlerize that term, say we love ice cream, we love our wife. It's all the same word, and it's not helpful. Jesus was quoting Leviticus, a legal text, which doesn't talk about emotion. And in the ancient Near East, love was a technical legal term in international treaties whereby two kings would promise to love each other and to look out for each other's interests, be loyal to one another, support one another, give one another practical support. This we can all do. But our trick is to make room for the other in our minds and hearts. Let's think just for a moment of the prophet's night journey, a story that is the paradigm of Muslim spirituality and is also a story of pluralism. You know the story. The prophet, peace be upon him, was asleep beside the Kaaba one night, and Gabriel came and brought him miraculously to Jerusalem. There he was greeted by all the great prophets of the past who welcomed him and called him their brother. They didn't say, what on earth do you think you're doing? We are the one true faith. No. They welcomed the newcomer into the brotherhood of prophets. Then Muhammad goes up through the seven heavens, at each stage meeting and talking with the great prophets of the past, like Adam and Jesus and John the Baptist, and finally Ibrahim in the divine sphere. And in one of these stories it says that Moses, actually, they have a discussion, and he advises him about how many times Muslims should pray. Muhammad's thinking of 10 times a day, and Moses says, don't even go there. Don't even think of that. It's unrealistic. Go down to 2, and the prophet from God hears the answer 5. So the prophets listen to one another. They take advice from one another, and they learn from one another. And finally, I want to end with the Greeks. The Greeks were in many ways a warlike people, a terrible people. And yet, in the 5th century, at the height of their cultural achievement, they invented a new genre, literary genre, the tragic drama. This was a religious festival as well as a literary one. It was held on the festival of Dionysus, and every male Athenian citizen was obliged to attend. This was a civic meditation on the problems of Athens. The plays presented a particular myth, one of the old Greek myths usually, that was adapted to reflect a particular